To peace, my friends. To everlasting, eternal peace. Excellent. Lepra milk, isn't it? Yes.
Where are we?
You're in the middle. Between the two. The real and the shadow. Right now you're in a kind of a limbo. You're neither here nor there.
Where are we?
Between light and shadow.
So kids, this is a very special episode of Between Light and Shadow. This is also my first foray into the field. I am on location at the historic Bunk Bar in Portland, Oregon. I don't know if it's historic for real. I've never even heard of it until I made this plan to come here. My very special guest is Fred from the Twilight Pwn, who I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are very familiar with. I'm pretty sure every listener I have came over from your podcast.
Right.
So Fred is here in town with his band, Golden Suits. He'll be performing a little later tonight. Well, by the time you hear this, it will have already happened. Fred, welcome to Between Light and Shadow.
Hello, Craig. Hello, listeners.
This is an honor. And this may be a historic occasion. Because I think this is the first time that hosts from two different Twilight Zone podcasts have actually met in person.
Well, our lawyers met like a month ago and really hashed this out, right? And then then my agent talked to your agent. They had brunch, but I'm actually slightly, I see you don't have any weapons on you. You've been patted down, but I haven't checked the doors. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I know there are a lot of us, and they're all spread out. I mean, we got Tom in the UK.
Right.
There's Brandon's in Hawaii.
Which one is Brandon? Brandon is
submitted for your approval.
He lives in Hawaii?
Yeah.
Lucky guy.
We should put together like a convention of Twilight Zone podcasts and have it there.
I think he should host.
Brandon, if you're listening, you're on for that. Yeah. This is cool.
Yeah.
Fred and I have been in touch for a few years. He was really helpful to me in getting the podcast put together.
You were very helpful to me in doing all my research for me for my podcast.
Right. So it's a little quid pro quo kind of a deal. So this is not terribly going to be terribly structured. We're just hanging out. We're having a beer before his show tonight. I'm going to ask him some questions, and we're just going to see where it goes.
Cool.
So, all right. So in 2013, I did an interview with you and John.
Right.
For my blog. John said the following. Fred and I were roommates in college. I'm not going to try to do a John voice, by the way.
No, I'd love to hear it, but maybe after we hit stop on this.
At the time, I had some of the Twilight Zone episodes on DVD, and we would occasionally watch them together. So that tells me that John was a pre-existing fan. Mm-hmm. But what about you? What was your first exposure to the Twilight Zone?
Well, I watched it in high school, actually. That was the first exposure I had to it because a teacher showed us the monsters who drew on Maple Street.
Oh.
It's kind of like actually a common thing, weirdly, for like high school like civics or English teachers. And I've always just been interested in old movies. My mom and I would always watch like whatever movie PBS had on late Sunday night, like The Thin Man or whatever. So anything that was black and white when I was growing up, I was just inherently interested in. So The Twilight Zone was a show I kind of like vaguely knew about and knew was cool and had seen the iconic episodes just kind of through cultural osmosis. But it wasn't until I got to college and lived with John that I really like dug into it. But I think ironically, John kind of only dipped his toes in because after he and I lived together, I really went on an obsessive phase and watched them all on my own. So,
do you remember the first episode you ever saw? Was it Monsters with You on Maple Street?
It was,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That was high school. So, who's the bigger fan overall, you or John? I think you just answered
me.
that.
Definitely me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think John has like a real life. He has like a family and now 2 kids. I'm still kind of living like maybe a slightly advanced 21-year-old's life 14 years later or 13 years later. So I'm not going to say I'm like the bigger fan, but I have more time to be a bigger fan than John does.
Do you feel like you were the one holding it together more or?
Sort of, but John is like an obsessive person. Like, I think we talked about this on one of our episodes, but he's like one of these guys who will like sit down and say, I'm going to watch every Oscar-nominated movie ever, and like he will actually do that. And so I think I was the one providing the enthusiasm for the show and really doing the research and setting up bits and calling Martin Grams Jr. on the phone. And he was the guy who kind of was just like, when are we recording?
Yeah.
What day are we recording? And what time? And if you're late, we're going to miss the day. So yeah.
Speaking of John, one of the fun things for me in listening to it throughout the course was he seemed to really kind of grow as he went. If for fun, I went back and listened to the very first episode.
Oh yeah,
like
it's terrible.
Right before.
Yeah.
I think you did the final one or the Q&A one or something.
Oh yeah.
And it's John. If you're listening, I love you. I'm not making fun of you, but when he opens that first episode, it is
so hesitant. Yeah.
He sounds very uncomfortable.
Welcome to the Twilight Pwn, a podcast that discusses each and every episode of The Twilight Zone. My name is John, and I'm here with my co-host Fred.
Hey.
And as it went for those 3 years, he kind of became more and more comfortable with it.
Yeah.
Now you, by contrast, seemed pretty comfortable with it from the beginning.
Well, I think it's because, like, having had this other, hobby, passion, side career as a musician, you get used to, like, doing interviews and talking on a mic, and I think it was John's first time ever doing anything like that, so maybe there was an element of hesitation that I didn't have. But also, like, keep in mind, we basically started the podcast as a joke, and I think when he said, welcome to the Twilight Pwn, it was the first time either of us had said it out loud. So there was an element of, like, so we're doing this, huh? This is actually happening.
So, at first, it wasn't like you set out to cover everything.
No, I mean, it was just 2 friends messing around, and like most podcasts are, I think, and then we really enjoyed it, and surprisingly found ourselves having an audience, and I really just started to enjoy not just the jokey side, but like thinking about the episodes and learning about them. I mean, using your blog as reference material in Martin Grams' book, and it just got bigger and bigger as we kept going. I mean, bigger and bigger is relative. It's not like we were opening Shea Stadium.
Sure.
But
Had you seen every episode before you started the podcast?
No, definitely not. So hadn't seen most of the 4th season.
Oh, wow.
Because the 4th season's hard. It's like hard to. It was hard. It wasn't on Netflix.
Right.
They don't show it on the marathons. So I've seen like most of 1, 2, 3, 5.
Okay.
4 was like a little vague, and now we're like I'd never seen Dust before, stuff like that. The videotaped episodes were a little bit like under the radar.
Yeah. So, as you went through, were there any that you had not seen that like was like a really great surprise? Like, oh my god, I never knew that existed, and that's brilliant. I mean,
I had seen Shadow Play, but I think I'd seen it at too young of an age, or I just kind of like washed over it. But Shadow Play is like brilliant. I mean, I think that is one of my top 5 episodes, and I just think it's like a little more sophisticated than some of the other episodes. There's just all these different layers that are on top of each other, and it's not one that ever like makes it to like Time Magazine's list. But that was a great surprise. I also was really surprised by Long Distance Call. Again, I think I'd seen it, but like hadn't really processed how good it was. So those were the 2 ones that I think about as being like real like fun surprises. In terms of ones that I'd never seen before, I was on Thursday We Leave for Home, although it does have JoJo in it. I think it's an exceptionally well-made episode and evocative. I'd never seen it, and I'm like a weird fan of Mute, even though I know it's sort of terrible. I just like a lot about it. Yeah,
same.
like it's just got a lot of fun elements in it. Yeah. Oh, and Perchance to Dream. I'd never seen that one before.
So next weekend, so a week from this weekend, I'm covering Perchance to Dream and Shadowplay.
Nice. Yeah. To Dream Within a Dream type
they're
episodes.
Very connected, and they're both Charles Beaumont.
Right.
So it's so I hope I do those justice for you.
Yeah.
No pressure.
Those
now.
are two of my favorites, but yeah.
Right, but you'll be listening critically.
I will.
Because they're.
Don't worry, I'm gonna write several iTunes reviews.
Okay, great.
Just based on those alone.
Damn. I don't have many of those at this point.
Yeah.
I have one very long, very, very mean-spirited iTunes review.
Oh, really?
Oh my god! And I think it was like either the first or the second one out of only like.
I'll tell John to take it down.
Sorry, damn it!
No, it's those iTunes reviews. It's like, I mean, you feel free to edit this out, but like,
oh no,
you really live and die with it. When you see that there's a new one, that's excitement personified.
Well, especially early on, you know, because I'm like looking at my like downloads every day. It's like, is anybody even hearing this? And then like, oh my god, there's a review. Oh shit, because that's really the only place where someone's going to actually post something other than like posting something on your Facebook thing or something.
But that feels more ephemeral. Like an iTunes review, even it feels like it's written in stone on a mountain or something.
And this dude just ripped me apart. And it was like, I hadn't even really started yet. It was like after the first like 3 episodes. It's like, you haven't even heard the real podcast. Don't fucking judge me yet. But
probably a Twilight Zone guy. Probably a rival.
Twilight Highlights. Oh, those guys. So, over 3 years, you cover all 156 episodes, which, congratulations, that's... I think most of these things kind of fall by the wayside at some point, but you guys made it. So, you finished the final episode, and the final episode of the show, not the final episode of the podcast, because you have gone on and some more stuff. So you hang up the Skype call, you turn off your microphone.
Yeah.
Where was your head like right then? Like, were you happy? Were you sad?
I was sad. It was actually very sad because it was like a thing where, I mean, we still do episodes every now and then, but like, the podcast started as a joke, and I think like it became something that we really kind of cared about and put a lot of energy into. And by the time it was done, like when you finish any big project, there's an element of pride and an element of sadness. I think if you asked John, he would probably describe it more as relief because he was able to like get back to being a somewhat responsible husband. But in my case, I was sad, I don't know. And it's also sad to think there's like no more original Twilight Zone left because it's like with some shows there's just such a volume, like Gunsmoke or Columbo. There's like 3,600 episodes.
Right.
But Twilight Zone is like this nice chunk, 156. It's like there's some amazing ones, there's some horrible ones, a lot in between, and you kind of feel like you're never gonna run out. But then when you do, you're like, oh wow, that's just done.
Especially if you started out not really intending to go the whole distance.
Yeah.
It's like suddenly there you are. I have a theory about TV shows that 5 years is where they should cut off.
Yeah, that's probably right. Yeah.
Now, obviously, a lot of them don't.
Yeah. Or some of them should start 2 years in and then go to the end.
Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Should start at season 3 and go to season 7, and then we're in good shape. Yeah. Do you think the Twilight Zone, though? Like, I still feel like there's some really good episodes in season 5. Like it got like more high and low. Like season 1 is like pretty reasonably consistent all the way through. I like pretty reasonably great. Season 5, it's like some of the absolute worst ones and some of the absolute best ones.
Yeah. I mean, when I was doing the blog, I had seen all this. I mean, I'd been a fan for a long time, so I had seen all of them multiple times. But in going through the blog, I had never done that when I had just gone chronologically through the whole series.
Yeah.
And season 5 was a surprise in that respect because I had always thought of it as, And no, there's some great stuff there. Yeah. And that was probably the source of most of my surprises in visiting the whole series was that there's some really good stuff in there. But there's some terrible stuff.
No, sure. Jesus Christ. It has the worst episodes. I mean, the 4th season has the most boring episodes, but in terms of like crappiness, the 5th season is king.
Right.
Isn't there one? Is it the third season that has all the Southern episodes? Like, I feel like for a while, like Serling was like, let's take the show down south.
Yeah, it's all backwoods.
There's all like Civil War episodes.
And funny, The Passersby for me was like one of the big surprises because I remember not liking it at all when I was younger, and then when I saw it as an adult, it was like there's a real like lyrical beauty to it that I'd never picked up on.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that like Lincoln coming in at the end like puts a weird like the lyrical beauty takes like there's a little bit of a record scratch on the lyrical
there's a grinding
beauty.
halt that happens there.
Yeah, but the atmosphere is cool. And it's all like smoky
and the score.
Yeah,
it's one of my favorites.
What is your favorite score of the whole show?
I used to say, not that I was ever asked that question, but if I did ask that question,
when Charlie Rose was interviewing me, for my blog,
the first time, The Big Tall Wish, Jerry Goldsmith. I always really loved that, and I'm not a huge fan of the harmonica, but I really always loved that score. I think, in the ensuing years, I'd probably say maybe now. I really love The Lonely.
The Lonely. And that's original score. That's not Hughes. But they reused it. I think
they did. Midnight Sun.
Yeah, Midnight Sun is
great score, which has never been released on a soundtrack, but the DVDs and the Blu-rays have the isolated scores on a lot of them. So
I also really like Shadow Play. You know, the beginning when it's like that, like dun, dun.
That's a library score.
Oh, really? It is. Oh, wow. It's very well done, though.
And that's one of the
Walking Distance too, of course. But
that's my favorite part of Walking Distance is the score. And I think I talked about this in the podcast. I mean, I've tried over the years to love Walking Distance. I like it a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a certain sensibility. I mean, if you've listened to the Twilight Pwn listeners, like, you know that John is like a very sentimental dude, and he really likes it. I think it's very well made. It's interesting. It's up there. It's like in my top 15. But you know what's really interesting? One of the moments I always wish we talked about this more on the podcast is at the very end when Gig Young is coming off the carousel and he's just spotlit. It's a very interesting moment because it's almost like the whole episode up until that point has been very naturalistic, and that's a very expressionistic touch.
Right.
It's kind of interesting in a weird way. Because I can't think of any other episode that has that in it, because that light, if you're assuming that this character is coming off that Ferris wheel in real life, he really traveled back through time, that spotlight is coming from nowhere. Right. You know what I mean? And I would say, maybe in Trouble with Templeton, there's a little bit of that moment when they're all walking out of the bar.
Sure.
But it's almost like from the beginning of the series, they didn't quite get what the tone of the show was.
Oh, sure.
It's like a theater moment, you know?
I think for me, you're kind of being carried along at that point.
Yeah.
And, Serling had some issues with the episode, and I kind of agree with some of them in just the way the story evolves and how he doesn't seem to really pick up on what's happening until way into it, which is completely...
How he sees his mom and he's like, what's going on? And he sees an old car.
Right,
he's like, an old car.
That's the money moment right there. This roadster, what?
It has logical issues of logic, but I don't know.
But I think the saving grace in all of it is it's a fairy tale, so you can get away with a lot if it's a fairy tale. And I think that moment on the carousel, I think, is just kind of the culmination of all of that build up towards that. I mean, this is a fairy tale. It's kind of Bradbury-esque in a way.
It is, like a very borderline saccharine fairy tale nostalgia.
But you're right. I think it's early. It's early Twilight Zone.
There's still some experimentation, like figuring out where the boundaries are.
It'd be interesting if they had done that in a third season. If they would have.
Yeah.
I think as the show progressed, it kind of got into the second season, the third. It became a little harder edge for me.
You mean grittier, or
a little bit grittier? Yeah.
Is what the darkest episodes are I don't know. I always feel It's a Good Life is one of the darkest episodes in some regards.
Deceptively, though, because I don't know that...
People think of it that way.
Right, because it's this little kid, and it's...
But it's like you have a scene in which a father is contemplating killing his son. Right. Like, that's dark. That's dark as F.
You're not a parent.
Well, true.
I will tell you,
Yeah.
there are moments where the thought of laying something heavy across that kid's skull
Well, fair
isn't
enough.
necessarily...
Maybe it was a release.
Isn't unreasonable. So that's a Serling script, but he adapted it from the story.
Yeah,
I think.
I wouldn't quote either one of us.
I don't know if that's autobiographical. But...
Sorry, anyway. We should get through more questions.
No, we're good. It can wander. It can ramble.
Let's ramble.
It's great. It's great. Darkest episode. I Am the Night, Color Me Black. It's pretty bleak. It's pretty dark. I mean, literally, but also.
So that was an easy go-to. Yeah. I also think that like Long Distance Call is also very bleak. And I mean, another Billy Mooney episode, but it's like you've got a grandmother suggesting that her grandson commits suicide. I mean, that's as dark as it gets. There's also a lot of like good bleak episodes, like Midnight Sun is nicely bleak. Nice and bleak.
It's nicely bleak. It's pleasantly bleak.
It's a nice bedtime story.
That's one of my favorites too.
Oh, yeah.
Midnight Sun is just great. I love that. Night Call. Is kind of
dark, but it just feels a little sillier or something like that.
It's not one of my favorites. But I mean, atmospherically, I think it's really...
It's a very well-made episode that has a sort of silly end to me.
Time Enough at Last.
Yeah, that's
pretty
dark.
dark.
Yeah. Although it's like, it starts as such a cartoon that it doesn't feel like a real emotion. Oh, you know what's a good dark one is... In Praise of Pip. I mean, it's not. It has the element of sweetness because you get the father-son relationship, but it ends in a down.
And that's probably another episode where I see it very differently now as a parent than I did when I was younger.
I could imagine you kind of laughing at it or something when you're like.
I don't know that I ever laughed at it, but I think as far as it resonating, I don't know that it. But now I mean, that really hits me, and that's probably one of the most, for me, emotional episodes that really hits me that way, is because it's just that sacrifice. And as a parent, it's like you would do that for your kid. I would totally do that, and it's Jack Klugman, and I am a huge Jack Klugman fan.
You know what's kind of funny too is that like the most emotional scenes are the ones that are the most understated. Like when he's just getting that phone call, receiving the news of his son's like imminent demise.
Right.
It's very emotional when he's just telling his gang boss like, oh, like my son's not doing well. But then when they're running around the carnival, it's almost like cheesy or saccharine, but it's like
it gets goofy.
Yeah, it's like they hadn't figured that out in the 60s.
Right.
But it's wonderfully underplayed, and it's a very emotional episode.
Yeah.
Closing this spot down here, listeners, where they're putting the chairs up on the tables while we talk.
It's a few after 9. Yeah. What time do you guys close?
9.
Oh, okay.
Can we get another 7 minutes?
Yeah, totally. I'm just gonna. It might be a little loud for the recording.
That's fine.
Don't stress.
Okay. Yeah. Here's
Production value, cinema verite.
That's right. That's exactly what we're about here. So you did a lot of answering questions in the Q&A episodes at the end. So if you're repeating stuff, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I did listen to those. I just don't remember them.
How dare you, Craig?
You will get to be my age, and you will.
I'm already there. I'm already there.
I don't think you are. Are there any episodes of the podcast, no, the podcast, not the Twilight Zone, but the actual podcast, that stand out for you as being not just better than the others, but really great? Like you guys were just firing on all cylinders. Like it was just
I don't know. I mean, the episode that was the most fun to record was Caesar and Me because it's just the most ridiculous episode. I mean, if listeners, if you're unfamiliar with our podcast, it was somewhat comedic in nature, and so certainly the goofier the episode, the more fun. Pure fun we had talking about it. So I think that one stands out to me as at least a fun episode from my perspective. But in terms of like the quality of the episode itself, it's hard to. I mean, like I'm just gonna sound like I'm tooting my own horn, so I don't really know.
Toot freely, please.
Honk honk, beep beep. I mean, I think our episode on Shadow Play was good because I think we both really connected with it, and we had a good discussion, at least to my recollection. I think I always like talking about episodes where there was like a musical angle because I'm a musician, so like, you know, Come Wander With Me, while it's not a good episode of the Twilight Zone necessarily, it like has an interesting musical angle, and so that kind of stuff I enjoyed. But you know, I don't know. I think like maybe this is the biggest toot of the horn, but I feel like our podcast was like, it was never that great, but it was never that bad. So it was always kind of like there was like it's like reliable.
It was,
you know?
solidly mediocre.
It was like, yeah, but I mean, like occasionally like the needle like moved up to like good, and it was never great though.
I think your listeners would disagree.
Well, yeah.
You have a lot of fans, I think. I have no idea what your numbers were.
Millions. We'll discuss when the recording things off.
Okay. Now, other end of the spectrum, are there episodes that you cringe at and you wish you could delete them and do them over?
Well, it's funny because like honestly, like there's some episodes where like The Hitchhiker was really bad because John lost the audio files, so like we had to kind of like do it again and pretend that our jokes were funny. So if you listen to that, it's very awkward.
That's mine every week, though.
Oh yeah, so you're familiar. There's some episodes where like John just kind of didn't watch the episode that closely, and like you can kind of tell because towards the end of the plot recap, I'm just like the only one talking, and I always hated that. So basically, any like fourth season episodes are rough because, you know, there's our podcast was like 40 minutes long, and like if you have to recap an hour's worth of plot, you just get bored towards the end of it. So yeah, the four seasons ones are rough.
And that's the tricky thing of the fourth season too, is because they're just padding these things out.
Yeah.
So it's like there's a lot of weird little story things.
I know, and it's like, do I have to really talk about the subplot where he goes and talks to his sister about the wax dummies?
Yeah,
like, I don't care.
I think you could probably skip a lot of it. And,
it's like it's interesting, I guess, to watch on some level, but it's not fun to talk about. So yeah, it's like padding, plot, padding, plot. You know.
So you and John finished the entire series run.
Yeah.
You go out with a bang. You know, the American Pie parody was brilliant and awesome.
Yeah. That was fun to do.
Loved it. But you weren't done. You came back.
Right.
You hit Twilight Zone the movie.
Yeah.
And then just recently you did a random episode of Night Gallery.
Yeah.
So the plan right now is you're just doing, give or take once a month.
Yeah.
Just get together, doing an episode. Is there anything specific that you are planning on covering? Like, is there something that you want to do?
I really like Night Gallery, actually, to be honest. I really enjoyed it. The movie is tough because there's so much material there, so it's hard to get through, and we would, you know, talk for like 5 hours, had to cut it down into 2, which is hard. But I'm actually like, I'd never really sat down and watched a Night Gallery episode front to back, and it was really fun. I mean, it's not as good as the Twilight Zone, but it's fun and campy and interesting, and so I'd love to do it. But I'm also like, I don't know, like we did the podcast for fun, and at a certain point it kind of became like we have to keep doing this because we've gotten this far. But now I feel like we're in a zone of like, now let's just do it for fun again. And I think like
there's no rules now.
Yeah,
you can do anything you
crazy want. Psychedelic. It's our Sgt. Pepper's era.
And so
Night Gallery would be
so you might hit some more Night Gallery.
Yeah,
not necessarily doing it all, just hitting various episodes. If you ever decide to dip into the 80s Twilight Zone, you're going to be in a tough spot because the Poniac Nation is going to want you to do the whole series. So if you do one, you've got to do them all. So
the 80s, it's just not enjoyable. Because like Serling not being there is a big negative thing for me, you know?
There were episodes I really liked of the 80s, but I guess
Which ones? I've watched
To See the Invisible Man.
Oh, I've never seen that one.
Near future, a guy is convicted for the crime of coldness, so he's marked with this thing, so nobody, for a year, like nobody can talk to him.
Oh, okay. It's kind of cool.
It is, it's good. The Kennedy one.
The Kennedy assassination one.
I thought that was good.
I'd have to go back and see, because I've largely seen the ones that are bad.
No, there were those. So, going forward, Do you ever see yourself doing another podcast?
I was really fun. I mean, I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it. John hated it the whole time, all 3 years of it. I'd love to do another one. I think it's really fun. I just don't, right now life is kind of busy for me, but I also feel like, there's plenty of Twilight Zone podcasts, yours included, that are picking up the slack. So I think the world is fine with me and John fading into the background and coming back here and there.
Well, I mean, I think we've all kind of looked at Tom Elliott as being kind of like the godfather of the Twilight Zone podcast. It's so bizarre to me that there's even a genre of podcast that is just the Twilight Zone.
I know.
I mean, it's simultaneously really cool as a fan, but kind of disturbing. It's like there's that many people doing the same basic thing, and I'm guilty of that. I'm the newest one.
Well, but, we were talking about this before we turned it on, but I think, like, Tom has his own thing. It's basically like mini documentaries about each episode, which is great.
It's like a Ken Burns.
It's like a British Ken Burns. Sir Kenneth Burnsham. Burnshire. And then I think there's a bunch of podcasts that were kind of like me and John, the Twilight Pwn, of varying levels of success, where it's basically like two friends kind of riffing on the show. But I think like yours is it's some kind of mishmash of comedy and facts, and I think that's needed. What I arrogantly think is not needed is like more random riff-based podcasts. I mean, unless somebody's like, I don't know, like unless like really amazing comedians do it, which I would love, but like,
Well, I know that there is one, and I have not even listened to one of their episodes because I'm busy with this one all the time, but the Twilight Zone.
Oh, that's a new one, yeah.
And I think they're like LA comedians.
Yeah, but they're, I mean,
but I haven't heard it.
It's fine, probably censor this. No, okay. It's fine. I mean, I listened to an episode. It was reasonably good, but I was just kind of like, I was. It's hard though, because after having done 156 episodes, you develop a sense of like, this is how it's done, guys. Right. But I think it was good.
You earned that.
Yeah.
Yes, you did. I mean,
the power.
And what I was going to say a minute ago, we've always thought of Tom Elliott as the Godfather. He's not even done with season 2.
I know.
So, love you, Tom. This is not a slight against you.
The Godfather with a real job.
But But I mean, you guys made it all the way, and I'm trying to think: has there been another one that?
Well, Twilight had done it all the way, but they were like really condensing.
I don't count them.
Yeah, who does?
I don't. I listened to a few that I didn't.
The problem is they're just going so fast. It's like it's
when I right before I interviewed you guys for the blog, I had done like a rundown of the podcast at the time, which now it would be a much longer entry because there's like 3 times that amount. But I think that's what I said about theirs was really it's just like how deep can you get with it?
If if you love those guys from Game Informer, you're maybe going to enjoy it just on that level, but it's not like adding new material for a Twilight Zone fan. Right? Sorry, we should probably
yeah.
Let's get to the real. Let's go through the hard balls. What do you got for me?
So you've got some cred, I guess is my point, in TZ circles.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in your thoughts on this. Why does the Twilight Zone endure?
Yeah, I mean, I should have a good answer for that, but I don't. I mean, I think
did not give him the questions in advance.
Folks. I mean, I think one of the big reasons it endures is because the phrase "the Twilight Zone" has become a cultural shorthand for anything that's eerie or strange, and I think that most people who use it don't really know what the show is at all. But it's almost become like a bit of slang. I'm sure there's great examples of this, which I of course can't think of right now. But bits of slang that come from pop culture, so they become anchored to. So that's one reason, I think.
Sure.
The other reason is because the lessons of it are timeless. Even though they're rooted in specific cultural moments, the great episodes of the show are not just talking about the 60s. So many 60s things feel so dated now because it's all just hippies flailing around. And I think that the Twilight Zone touched on core types of questions that people will always ask themselves. And I also think the third reason is just it's very well made. I mean, there's horrible episodes, but the great ones are among the best pieces of speculative sci-fi television ever made, I think. And so I think it's a combination of quality, timeless subject matter, and that weird little cultural meme factor that's a little bit hard to know why that happened, but it did, right?
So after spending 3 years, studying, researching, talking about the show, you are a musician, you're a songwriter.
Yeah.
Has anything from the Twilight Zone kind of surfaced in your songwriting?
Well, actually one thing very literally has, and there's probably like a more intellectual answer to this, but there's a very specific answer, which is that when I watched the episode Elegy, there's a little bit at the end where the astronauts are trying some wine that Wickwire, the robot, sorry, spoilers, gives to them to try. And they're tasting it and they say, oh, blah, blah, blah. And it's hard to understand what they're saying. But if you look at the closed captioning on Netflix, what they're trying is something called Liebfraumilch, which is a white wine that comes from Germany. So I thought that was a cool word. I study German. I'm interested in it. And so I was like writing this song, and I was like, I had this one line in it that needed like a reference to Germany because the song is about a trip I took to Germany. And so the line I wrote in it was Liebfraumilch in Germany, and that's because of a reference to Elegy. And so it literally, a stupid, silly reference to Elegy worked its way into one of my songs.
That's awesome.
Now, in terms of broad thinking, I have no effing idea, but that one line is a direct reference to Elegy.
So your band is Golden Suits.
Yeah.
New album is Kubla Khan. It's great. I'm going to put some links in the show notes. So
Put up the song. It's called "Is It Wrong?"
Is It Wrong?
There you go.
Which is a great song.
Thank you.
The whole album is great. I'm excited. He's going to go do a show in a little bit.
It's gonna be off.
It's going to suck ass, you know?
Yeah.
So, Fred, this has been awesome. I really
Awesome to meet you.
appreciate
Oh,
you
it's great.
flying clear out here from back east just to do this
Yeah,
podcast.
the show's
It's so-
an afterthought.
this is just beautiful. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Cool.
I was in bed with a fever, reading through your text. Liebfraumilch in Germany and a ring around your neck. First you have to prove it to yourself. Then you have to prove to everybody else how wrong they are. Well, is it wrong to give you my love on the other side of doubt? And is it wrong that you now know what I have been on about? 12 years old in black jeans, standing on a little corner, screaming out at the passing car, no blood for oil. Well, if I could only show you how years are made of days, and pull away that bright book you add up to your face. First you have to prove it to yourself. Then you have to prove to everybody else how wrong they are. Well, is it wrong to give you my love on the other side of doubt? And is it wrong that you now know what I have been on about? I don't know how to tell you how strange it is to be getting older, kiss by kiss. Well, here's to you in the new year and a rainbow to your door. We'll dance together at RMJ's by the Christmas tree in coats, and everything'll be white light and wine in every hand. You laugh at me with those moon
between light and shadow.